Many of you are at the point in the year where your students have just taken or maybe are about to take their first test for you, their first end of unit assessment. And while I hope no one in your class fails, reality is that is most likely not going to be the case. So, what do you do when students fail a test? How do you decide whether to allow retakes or do test corrections? How do you know if you should reteach or if you just keep plowing forward? These are the questions we are going to cover in today's episode and more. So let's get right into it. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. The topic for this episode was inspired by a submission to my annual Secondary Science Simplified survey that I email out every January, and this is what the teacher said. How do you handle failing test grades? How do you handle this differently for on-level students versus honors? And what about when they take a test but also didn't finish the assignments leading up to the test? Assignments that you gave multiple reminders about, made a screencast video walking them through it, emailed parents about it, and they still didn't do it. I refuse to do retakes. I hate the idea of test corrections and giving partial credit. They earned that awful grade. They need to learn from it. But other teachers do it, which makes me the mean teacher. What do I do? So first, I kind of want to address a few specific things this teacher said, because I think a lot of these sentiments are things that a lot of us have experienced. And then I'm going to hit you with 5 practical tips for what to do when they fail the test. So first, I don't personally think you necessarily need to handle this differently in on-level versus honors. I don't think there is a certain methodology that I would use for one versus the other. But I do think this is something you need to kind of read the room about, and you need to assess for your specific group of students, regardless of what their classified level is for the class that they're in, okay? So I think you need to look for variables like, maybe look at the timing of the test. What percentage of the class plays a fall sport? And this was a week of big games all around the board. I know when I taught at a private school that we had 1 week where we played our rivals in every sport. So our rival school, we played them in soccer that week, and they had a football game. They had all these different things all at once. And maybe I accidentally had a test that week. So I would be looking for variables like that first. Those are always things I'm kind of looking for. And then also, again, looking at that group of students and looking at the demographic and just kind of the breakdown and the personalities even of the students. That's why I don't feel like I can say do this for honors versus do this for on-level. At one point, I had 3 sections of on-level biology at the same time. In each of those sections, they were all different class periods, entirely different groups of students. So I feel like I would play it differently depending on the group. So I just want to address that first. I also think for this specific teacher, all the things that they listed, you have already supported them plenty, trying to get them to do their work. When you're saying you screencast a video and you contacted their parents, you did that and they didn't do the assignment, so you're not surprised that they failed. You can only do so much, and then your students have to do their part. They have to step up to the plate. If that is something you struggle with, and if you feel guilt around is there more that I should have done for them? I encourage you to listen to episode 123, What to Do When You Care More Than Your Students, episode 145, which is How to Build Resilience in Post-Pandemic Students, and then also episode 155, How to Create Active and Accountable Learners. So I don't think you need to worry about that you're not doing enough here to give them those opportunities and to give them the notice. It sounds like you did. The other thing I want to say too, before I give the 5 specific tips for how I handle test failures, is I would not worry about what other teachers are doing. That's kind of how the submission ended. I'm the mean teacher because other teachers just let them correct everything. I don't know about you, but I don't care if I seem mean. Everyone said that my class was the hardest when I was in the classroom full time. And then so many of those students have come back to me later. So many of them are now moving home post-college or post going off on their big adventure. Now they're coming back home. I'm running into them in grocery stores. I'm running into them at restaurants. I ran into a kid at the bank the other day. I'm running into them at wedding showers and baby showers for their classmates. And they're saying, you were the only teacher who prepared me for life after college. I thought your class was so hard, Mrs. Joyner, and anything I knew that prepared me for life after high school or life after college was from your class. And I'd say, perfect. I'm so glad to know that I was helpful in that. I don't care that I had this rep of being a really hard teacher. And a lot of times students will take hardness and firmness and holding a boundary as meanness. And it doesn't have to be mean, because I've said this before, clarity is kindness. When they would tell me I'd be mean, I'd say, I'm not mean, I'm clear. I've clearly communicated my expectations for you, and I've consistently reinforced them. I'm actually very kind to you because you know exactly where you stand with me. You know exactly what I expect of you, and you know exactly what the repercussions are with me. It's very kind of me that you walk in my classroom and you know what to expect, and I'm not going to be this inconsistent, emotional, up and down teacher. Maybe you see it as mean. My firmness and my structure is actually kind because it's clear. So that is kind of my rampage on that. The other thing I'd say too is if they're saying that, you're the only one who doesn't give us text corrections, then I'd be like, okay, perfect. That gives you even more reasons to spend more time on my class because your other teachers are going to give you second and third and fourth and fifth chances. Now then you have more time to focus on my class since other teachers are taking it so easy on you. So perfect. I don't care if I'm the hardest teacher. So those were kind of some sassy comments. I just kind of felt like I had to get this off my chest because I just feel burdened for the teacher who sent this because I totally get it. I have been there where you've been told you're the mean teacher and I'm on the other side of it and saying it is worth it. So hold the line. Okay. Unless you are actually just like being mean and rude to students, then maybe be kinder. Okay. Now, what do we do then? Here are my tips for what you do. First things first, I look for trends. Is it like half the class? Is it a quarter of the class? Is it a very unique subset of the class, like you said, that you identified that didn't do XYZ assignments? Are there trends here? Are there correlations between who failed or how many failed and, how much work they did, or if they play a fall sport, like I mentioned, or, maybe only 2 kids failed, but they have a lot going on in their personal lives. Like we're looking for reasons here. So we're just observing right now. We're collecting data. We're looking for these correlations. And alongside that, this is where I really recommend tracking averages over the year. So like every year that you teach biology, you're doing averages. This is where it's a gift if you have multiple sections too of the same prep. So you can compare your 3rd period to your 5th period, even though, like I said, they can be so different. But like we're going to collect data over the years of like, what do they typically get on the cells test? What do they typically get on the stoichiometry test? And again, if you're like, well, I don't have any of that data, then you start today. You start collecting today, and this is going to serve you in the future. Because I do think it helps us see, I could always see looking back that like all of my students tended to struggle on our Unit 3 test. It used to be called our energetics unit. And so I could see that typically was a lower unit. I will also say, even after I revamped that unit, I made it energy flow, which I'll talk more about later and why I did that and how that did help. It very much helped. But that still tended to be a lower test overall compared to all the other tests all year. And it always fell around homecoming, Spirit Week, the end of quarter 1 and the beginning of quarter 2. So I know that kids were 1, very socially distracted. 2, school was kind of like a joke during that time. So even if the test was obviously not on the actual Spirit Week, before or after, there were just a lot of distractions. 3, I feel like anytime something falls around the end or the beginning of a quarter, kids are really focused, like getting in all their late work before the end of quarter grades and their progress reports. So then maybe they're not studying for your test. So again, we're looking for these trends and we're comparing across years to see like, oh, maybe this is always a test the average is not going to be as good on compared to other tests. And it's just kind of the timeliness of it. And we're going to just give ourselves and our students grace there. Okay. So this is all stuff we're looking for. Now, the next tip I have is if you can, I like to divide my units by concepts. Every unit that I write for It's Not Rocket Science is broken down into 3 to 6 concepts. And if you can, then break down your test by concept and look for trends to see where they struggled most. Okay, so if you own my biology curriculum, you'll know that biology in my state is an end of course exam course. So everyone's taking the standardized test. And I know that biology is the EOC course in most states. And so what I did for all my biology tests is the multiple choice and the open response are divided by concept. So you can very clearly see when I'm looking at students who failed, like they got all of concept 1 and 2, but it was just concept 3 that they struggled with. And so then like, where do I need to reteach? Where do I need to reinforce? Where do I need to maybe reassess my instructional resources? Breaking it down by concept is so, so helpful. Now, if you have my anatomy or physical science or chemistry, you might be thinking, well, you didn't do it for these courses. And I didn't. And that is because, well, there's a couple of reasons that's for. One is because that was not an EOC course, so I wasn't doing as much like data mining for those courses. 2, I felt like it served my students better in those courses to do all the multiple choice and then all the FRQs as opposed to going back and forth. 3, I felt like a lot of the concepts in those courses were not as isolated and they really overlapped. So it was hard to divide the test up that way. So if you used any of those curricula, know that the multiple choice are all mixed. But then when you get to the open response, I did write the open response questions in concept order. So you could go through them and read them and then draw a line between concept 1 and 2 questions and then draw a line between concept 2 and 3. I write those in order. So they are very easy to divide up if you want to look at them by concept. The only exception is in physical science. In the first unit and second unit, there are some, I kind of put a lot of the calculations together just because I feel like when students are in the flow of doing the math, they want to keep doing math before they move on to like FRQs that are more explaining and applying. But you can still break them down pretty easily there. And there's editable versions of all of those assessments if you want to divide them up yourself. But I highly recommend, especially for a course like biology, break it down by concept to see. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to ask yourself, and this is what I do anytime I get any sort of critique on my resources, in my classroom, whatever. And this, I feel like students failing is kind of like a critique, okay? I ask myself, is there something that I could have done better? Is there a way that I can improve my practice? Is there a way that I could have provided more support? And you just look at the data. We're making data-informed decisions here. So like this teacher listed all these ways she tried to support students doing the work that would have helped them be successful on the test. Okay, you've done enough there. We're not going to hold their hand and walk them to tutoring. You've done enough. But we're going to look at other things like the actual instructional resources you used. Especially, that's why if you divide by concept on your test, it's so, so helpful. You can see if like one concept is consistently rough for students every time. So for example, when I was first teaching biology at a large public school, we had group unit tests. Like every biology teacher used the same tests. And so that informed our practices, but we were allowed to do different things on a day-to-day basis with our students. And we saw consistently across, 4 to 5 teachers, that's hundreds of students. Okay, we had large sample sizes here. Macromolecules was in our cells unit. It was kind of like our biochemistry, our microscope unit. It was all together. And that was the unit that everyone failed the most. And then also specifically, they struggled with macromolecules the most. And so when I finally moved to a new school where I could kind of do my own thing, I pulled macromolecules out immediately. And I added it to my first unit, which was my biology basics unit. So concepts like lab safety and equipment and experimental design, all things they've seen in other classes prior to mine that are more familiar. Then I'm putting this brand new concept of macromolecules in there. That's the only one concept that's really fresh and new for them. And so I'm taking it out of this unit where there's like a lot of fresh and new stuff. And by moving macromolecules and teaching it early and then bringing it up in every other unit, it became way less of a problem topic for students. Another thing you can do too, if you're like, I can't rearrange all of these things, but you can see like, do I need to quiz on individual topics before the test? Like y'all, you should not be finding out on test day that a student doesn't know how to do a Punnett square, or that a student doesn't know how to balance a chemical equation, or that a student doesn't know how to solve for velocity or calculate acceleration. Those are all things we know in advance because that's a very specific skill that we're going to quiz on in advance. So that's another way you can improve your practice. If you're analyzing the data, you're looking at the questions and you're saying like, oh, all my honors biology students like really struggled with calculating Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium or knowing how to calculate gene frequency versus allele frequency, then like I need to quiz on that early. And I also need to reteach that content or teach that content in a different way. You're making data-informed observations at this point in the process. Next is I want you to ask yourself, is this just hard content? Like, is this just something that is hard? And is there a way that I could rearrange it so that the hard content has some easier buffer content? So like, as I mentioned, My first biology unit, it's very introductory. It was a lot easier. We were like easing them in as ninth grade biology students. I added macromolecules into there because that's hard content. I pulled it out from all the other hard content. It was taught alongside and I put it in here. And now it has buffer content that helps to balance it out. Or again, like I mentioned, we used to have our energetics unit. And that energetics unit, it had macromolecules, it had enzymes, it had ATP, it had photosynthesis, it had cellular respiration. We then moved macromolecules to cells, which I still didn't think helped. So then I moved it to my biology basics. But we still had all of this really hard stuff in this energetics unit. And that's when I had my own autonomy. I said, bump it. I want to teach something easy in this unit to balance this out. What goes with this? Well, to its core, biochemical reactions are showing the cycling of energy at a microscopic level. How can we show the cycling of energy and the flow of energy at a macro level that they really understand? And that's when we pulled trophic pyramids and food webs from our ecology unit, which again is already one of the easier biology units. And we put it alongside biochemical reactions. And I created this energy flow unit that I'm so passionate about teaching that way. So maybe there's a way, again, this is for future problem solving as you're seeing that this is like a trend that is typically hard. Is there a way that you can reconfigure your content and your sequence so that some of those harder concepts that are just hard, like same with Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, is just a hard thing to do. Is there a way I can buffer it around some easier content so that students can find more success overall on their test? And then here's the last thing you're going to do is where do we go from here? Once you've done all that self-reflecting, all that data mining, if you will, all that trend searching and correlation searching, is you're going to consider what is best for the students' grades, what is best for their learning and success on the future content you're going to get to. Okay, so first, let's talk about their grades. Do they need to do test corrections to earn points back? Or could they just do test corrections and not get points for them? I always did test corrections. As we went over tests, we made corrections. And then I collected all tests back and I stored them in a file folder with each student's name on them. And then at different points throughout the year, we pulled those file folders out and reviewed them and reviewed what we'd missed before, especially before midterms and EOCs and finals and all of that. But we reviewed those. So we're doing test corrections, but they're not getting points back for it. It's just a skill that they're doing because it's helpful to learn from your mistakes. So you can decide, do they need the points for their grades or do we just need the skill of test corrections? And we're going to do that as we're going over it. You can decide, like, is this really going to bomb their grades or do you have enough grades? Like, do they have to retest or do you have enough grades in the system? And if you do feel like you need to retest because they've all dropped a letter grade from this one test and it's right before the quarter progress reports and you're like, they're all going to freak out, then take your existing test, run it through ChatGPT and say, hey, can you give me a retest version of this that tests on similar content but it's different questions, and let it do that work for you. Your retest does not need to be all done by you. You did all the hard work on the front end writing the first test. I don't think you need to be writing second and third and fourth tests, okay? Now, for me and my students, mine always had plenty of grades to balance out a bad test here and there. And that's why I love dividing my gradebook into only two categories: major grades, minor grades. Major grades are summative assessments, minor grades are formative assessments. And this is also why I do at least one non-traditional summative assessment per quarter. And usually it ends up being per unit. So this is something like a project. It could be 50 points, which is half a test. It could be 100 points, which is the amount of a test. But it gives them another opportunity in every unit to show their understanding in a different way. So maybe you're a quote unquote bad test taker. You make a 50 on every test, but you can easily make a 100 on a project. A 50 and 100 averaged together, that's a 75% C. That's not going to bomb your overall grade in the class because you're going to have those together. So I like to, instead of doing retests and replacing test grades and all of that, I'd rather provide a variety of summative assessments, a variety of ways to show me what you know, and let those grades mathematically balance each other out. That's my personal opinion. Now, let's talk about actual learning. Like, do I need to stop and reteach and all of that? If this is like a one-off topic and you truly feel like you've done the best you could, and maybe this is just like an apathetic group, and over the other years of students haven't struggled this hard with acids and bases per se, maybe the best lesson your students can learn is that every choice that they make, how they spend their time, what they do with every learning opportunity presented to them, with all the instructional resources you've given them to do to learn the material, every choice has a consequence. Okay, so you just let it be and you move on. Now, If they're not passing a topic that's critical for future understanding, like macromolecules for biology or naming and writing chemical compounds for chemistry, then that might be the time to force a retest if you need to have a lot of individuals that need to relearn it on an individual basis. And I would require them to come to tutoring before they're allowed to take a retest. They'd have to come to tutoring, get extra help, and then they'd have to come to a different tutoring day to actually retake the test. So it puts the initiative back on them. You're not going to drop everything and stop the whole class to offer this opportunity for them. But the other thing is, if it's majority of the class did not do well on this, then that's when I would stop and reteach. If everyone completely struggled with macromolecules, then again, I'm going back to all those previous questions and assessing where I could have improved how I taught it to them. And then I might be taking the time to stop and reteach. So hopefully this gave you kind of a framework to walk through as you process what you need to do if your students fail a test and how you kind of move forward next. So your take-home challenge after all of that is start tracking data with your class averages now. If you've never done that before, go ahead and do that. Maybe start reworking your tests by concept, dividing them up. Again, you don't have to do that if you use It's Not Rocket Science. You can just go through and you can draw a line on your answer key for those open response to know what go where. And then maybe you just need another simple step here would be considering adding in a quiz earlier in the unit for harder concepts, or adding in an alternative way to show their understanding to balance out the test grade. I really, really encourage you in that. You can find the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 202. And I would love it if you haven't left a review for the podcast yet, if you would do so, especially if you're excited to start tracking averages and reorganizing your test questions by concept. Leave a review for the podcast. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.